Hello and greetings, friends. Welcome back. Again, fresh new chapter, chapter 3. It's going to be a couple of times this semester where I'm going to have an elongated chapter that I can't split up. There's a couple or three of them I'm going to be able to split up into two parts like I did chapter 2. In order to fit everything in, but there's a couple that I'm not going to be able to do that with, and this is chapter 3 is one of them. All right, so it's going to be a little lengthy here. The lecture a little lengthier than most of them, but the wonders of modern technology. You can stop the video, and you guys can come back later on and pick it up. Not so for myself. I'm going to have to get the material in, but I can handle it. I'll be just fine. You know, growing up into adulthood sometimes frustrated me at how my parents' generation, the WW2, World War II generation, did not seem to accept change too well. And I hope that I hope my generation, the boomer generation, I hope we're beyond that. But you know, as I begin to get near retirement, I am beginning to accept some things. One of them is that you know, I know since the 2000s that that world's not coming back, right? Since you know, via 9/11, right? I mean, we've definitely become a security state, uber security state, and you know, we're not going back to the way it was. And with the growth and influence of the World Wide Web, so has the opportunities for bad people to mess with that. And then, you know, as the web can be gamed, therefore more security there, right? Security, and it's just really harder to wade through for the average individual. I personally hate it. I'm not, I don't have an aptitude for, you know, for it. Maybe because I didn't grow up with it, but and you know, we're not going back. We're not going back to even a simpler time with you know, getting on the web. The pandemic, right? The pandemic, since there's no way to vaccinate animals, we're stuck with this, right? We're stuck with this. I've accepted that fact. You know, it's probably here to stay. We have a changing world, and it's changing very fast. And you know, with you know, all of its inconveniences and you know, so forth. In the same vein, the chapter that we are heading into, we're going to see some major shifts from what we have been studying, societal shifts, if you will. And we're going to look at you know, climate change, how climate change and environmental degradation lead to the collapse of river-based societies. And I'm glad we're covering this in a way, because you know, you hear about climate change today as if, and I've said this before in here, that as if this is something new. Climate change has been going on since time memorial. The big debate is you know, whether we have anything to do with it or not. Transhumant migrants with their animal herds in need of pasturage, and pastoral nomads with their horse-drawn chariots. We're going to see that interact in both destructive and constructive ways with settled agrarian societies. We're going to see a fusion of migratory and settled agricultural peoples, producing expanded territorial states in Egypt, Southwest Asia, the Indus River Valley, and Shang, China, that supplant earlier river basin societies. We'll take a look at micro-societies. Micro-societies, they emerge in Eastern Mediterranean and the South Pacific. We'll look at those areas a little more in depth this time around, based on expanding populations and increased trade. Let's take a look here at the objectives. What do we want to, what do I want you to learn in this chapter? I want you to be able to explain the relationship between climate change and human settlement patterns in the second millennium BC. My video panel up, there we go. Describe the impact of transhumant herders and pastoral nomads on the settled communities. Compare the varied processes by which territorial states formed and interacted with each other across Afro-Eurasia. Examine the development of micro-societies in the South Pacific and the Aegean, and explain the role geography played in their development. So let's get to the notes here, and we will get rolling. There we go. I'm going to get my side panel up. So the introductory material here. Toward the end of the second millennium, a period of severe warming and drying exerted new strains on the major settled societies of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley, which we've looked at. And this led to widespread suffering and pressure on governing structures. So the environmental change decreased agricultural production, right? That goes without saying, no surprise there, causing drought and famine, but also a deeper anxiety that the natural order had been upended. Now, populations of the transhumant herders and the pastoral nomads living in proximity to these major states were also hard hit by the changing climate, increasingly infringing on the state's lands in search of natural resources. So namely water and better grazing land. And while this led to unprecedented challenges for the ruling class of these states, it also spurred adaptation and innovation. Now, these states assimilated some of these outsiders into their social fabric, their social structure, as well as their military techniques and technology. So above all, this included the horse-drawn chariot, which introduced a huge change in warfare on the plains of Afro-Eurasia over the next couple of centuries. So distinct from these centralized polities with large populations in the South Pacific, the Aegean Sea, Northern Europe, and the Americas, micro-societies were able to form. And because population density was lower and competition for natural resources was less fierce, these smaller polities were sustainable. For several reasons, environmental change and, well, it was just devastating. I'm trying to get right way to say this. It was devastating for the ruling class, the ruling elites, and major states in Afro-Eurasia, who were no longer really able to secure and control their cities. trade routes, and settled communities as well. They couldn't control them anymore. So you have these incursions at this time by pastoral nomads on horse-drawn chariots, and transhumant herders sought food, water, and other natural resources that were within the bounds of these communities. Now, they threatened the hinterlands. They threatened the hinterlands that could not be defended by centralized powers as easily anymore. Centralized powers in walled cities, and these states, their crucial trade routes were exposed also to attack. On page 112, you can take a look at map 3.1 and examine some of this. Now, although the transhumant herders and the nomadic pastoralists significantly threatened these states, they also introduced technologies and practices that ultimately strengthened some of these Afro-Eurasian powers. They arrived in more densely populated and agriculturally productive river valleys from the highland plateaus near the inner Eurasian steppes. And again, you can see this in the map, page 112, and the deserts of Southwest Asia. Now, although the ruling elites wrote about these newcomers as barbaric and opposed to civilization, elements of their technology, their religious practices, and languages were integrated into these states. Chariots, for instance, in addition to warfare, could also be employed in civic and religious processions and popular entertainment, such as races. As you can look at page 114, illustration there. Let's break down the horses and chariots. And you see a map there that I've been talking about. Horses and chariots. Although horses were first domesticated, and you can see this on your maps, up in the Caucasus Mountains, in the broader region, they were as likely to be used as a food source as much as labor. And we've learned about the development of horse-drawn technology from the excavation of nomadic and agrarian people's tombs from this particular period. And it was not until the end of the second millennium. Again, I'm not real comfortable with a lot of the dates. I'm not sure who has that right. We'll say between second and first millennium BC. Not until the end of that, in between there, maybe, that they were used as a form of, horses were used as a form of transportation that we think of, when we think of horses. So the nomadic pastoralists on the Eurasian steppes began to construct weaponized horse-drawn chariots, and you can read about this. I mean, as you know, in the Old Testament, the Assyrians and the Hittites, which I'll talk about a little later, were using these. You can read about it right in the Old Testament. But they weaponized these horse-drawn chariots in collaboration with craftsmen from urban settlements. So the chariots, and again, on page 114, you can see some photos of this. The chariots took the form of one axle, two-wheeled chariots, two-wheeled vehicles. And over the years, highly trained horses were equipped with increasingly light and durable chariots, which included special spoked wooden wheels, and you can see that on your text page there in 114, and the use of bronze, okay, and eventually stronger, more flexible iron to bolster its moving parts. So this all serves to make sustainable innovations in chariots, their speed, and their durability. And this accelerates travel and enhances military capacity against forces without that horse-drawn technology. Big advantage, right, for those cultures. So in response, these innovations were soon incorporated by the armies of the major states in Egypt, Syria, Persia, South Asia, and China, as well as in Western Europe. So the horse-drawn chariots, with nomadic dwellers on the steppes, first attached harnessed horses and chariots, and then they developed lighter and stronger technology. Agrarian settlements imported these chariots from the steppes, and then they would add their own craftsmanship to it. Probably the most significant impact of the spread of horse-drawn chariots was obviously, it was on warfare. So the speed of travel by chariot, made by the distance between political capitals, less significant, and thus increased the speed of potential conflict between them. So on the battlefield, you had horse-drawn chariots that were made the conventional use of infantry far less effective, right? So this sparked a huge trend from large numbers of foot soldiers to battalions of chariots, which were generally equipped with a driver and an archer. So this made them more mobile, accurate, and with deadlier weapons. So the success of this new variety of warfare seriously challenged existing political systems in major settlements. So by adapting this technology to their own armies, some states were able to counter its effectiveness of the chariot. Archaeological evidence, in fact, of chariots shows that settlements as distinct as King Tut in Egypt and the Shang Chinese had already, or had soon thereafter, adapted that type of technology. Emergence of territorial states, another shift here. We see the shift of weaponry, and now we're going to see it from the old city states to territorial states and microstates. The incursion of nomadic warfare had profound effect on geopolitics. Older city-states increasingly gave way to more expansive territorial states, which could more effectively establish sovereignty over far larger hinterlands than before. So in addition to military and transportation technology, these new territorial states maintain control over larger populations and across generations through several innovations. So these new rituals were devised to organize the transmission of power from one generation of rulers to another. Power, therefore, was concentrated in charismatic rulers, right? And who became a reference point for large populations to identify with their personalities. So rather than think of one's identity as within the confines of a physical city, people could increasingly identify with these rulers, a larger territory, and the linguistic and ethnic boundaries of their communities. So deriving their strength in part from this enlarged and strengthened identity of their residents, the territorial states asserted authority in Egypt, Mesopotamia, China over the course of the time period. So these new territorial states, they differed in several fundamental ways from the city-states that we had looked at. In that, with the city-states, they persisted in large portions of the world as well, but the territorial states concentrated power. And like I said, these charismatic monarchs who transmitted power from one generation to the next. They developed widespread bureaucracies to manage affairs and maintain order over large distances. And these bureaucrats helped to maintain the more elaborate legal codes instituted in territorial states. So, though territorial states had defined borders, their legal and bureaucratic system was well suited to continuous expansion and incorporation of new land into which it could be extended. I'm going to switch here to another slide. Here we go. And get this next slide up. There we go. And get my little side panel up. Here we go. Okay. I was worried about that. I was worried about that transition. Folks, you don't know how clumsy I am with modern technology. But it worked. All right, let's go. Territorial state of Egypt. As elsewhere in Afro-Eurasia, prolonged drought undermined political stability in Egypt. Egyptian settlement was based upon, the Nile River. We remember that. And when the Nile, with the Nile River, when that is on, it was as on which it was, well, it was the major vehicle, for agricultural production. When that was, flooding, that would cramp the development there. But generally, you could depend on it. When it failed to overflow, though, you don't want it flooding. But when it would overflow, that wasn't as bad. When it failed to overflow, which it sometimes did, and irrigate crops for several years, your harvest would wither. So political power depended on reliable agricultural production. So as a consequence, the pharaohs lost legitimacy, and elite individuals in different regions were able to assert power depending on the weather and how the Nile River behaved, And this leads to the fragmentation of authority in Egypt's old kingdom. So after a century, of drought, the annual flooding of the Nile began to normalize again. And this enables the Middle Kingdom and later the New Kingdom to reunify political control over the Nile and expand this control to the north and the south. There we go. Religion and trade in the Middle Kingdom in the centuries following pharaohs at Thebes consolidated power in Upper Egypt. Ammon, a god who was previously marginal, was elevated in importance under the rule of Amenemhet. Amenemhet linked his own political authority to the new cult around this god, and this god's name means hidden, and it was associated with breath and air, and it was easier as a result then to incorporate this less viable energy and imagery. So this encouraged believers in other gods to support this cult. And it especially appealed to people from less wealthy regions. Ammon became fused with the sun deity Re, forming Ammon-Re. This king of gods was elevated above all others in Thebes. Thebes was in, becomes modern day central Greece, okay? But his cult was centralized in a temple in that area. Meanwhile, Amenemhet was able to utilize Amun-Re to enhance his own prestige, which showed the new cult's dual as a political power and had a lot of spiritual meaning as well. So he represented a new sort of pharaoh, kind of a good shepherd, right? And you see this too. You see a lot of borrowing from these early cultures. They borrow from Moses, right? They borrow from the Jewish Pentateuch, flood stories, and so forth. Responsible for supporting the people and his flock. So in practice, he instituted charities and performed homage to the gods in order to ensure the annual flooding on which the masses depended. Page 117, the hypostyle hall, you can see image there of Amun-Re. And we talked about this too. The gods in these areas, depending on where you're at, the geography depicted, who the gods were. A very arid, dry area like Egypt, hence the sun gods. So religion and trade also, I want to continue that here in the centuries after, or in the Middle Kingdom. In the centuries after that, pharaohs at Thebes consolidated power in Upper Egypt. Amun, a god who was previously marginal, again, he was elevated under Amenemhet. And you can take a look at luxury imports too on page 120 and map 3.2. You can check that out and look at the last concept just got done talking about. Take a look at expanding trade networks in Middle Kingdom Egypt. The generation of new wealth in the Middle Kingdom that empowers a class of urban merchants and professionals. And this differs significantly from the Old Kingdom. So not only were these new urban elites able to afford a variety of indoor and outdoor leisure activities like banquets or hunting, they could extend this wealth into the afterlife by having tombs constructed and filled with material goods that they would anticipate using after their death, right? Related very much to the idea of what goods were put into the pyramids for the pharaohs, for the dead pharaohs. So to support these lifestyles and the growth of the Egyptian state, it was essential to extend trade relations in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Red Sea, the coast of East Africa, and southward up the Nile River. And again, look at map 3.2 when you get a chance. Now the Hyksos, and yeah, you can see them on this map as well. The Hyksos, they were able to easily overthrow the 13th dynasty of Egypt by crushing Pharaoh's foot soldiers. In addition to the chariots that they did this with, they used superior bronze axes and bows. So as conquerors, they quickly became rulers of Egypt. And rather than assert a different cultural and political system, they mostly reinforced existing Egyptian institutions. So the introduction of new military technology into a much faster, mobile, and capable force that was able to expand Egypt's boundaries emerged. So additionally, though outside influences introduced new industrial and artistic techniques, and even new agricultural and animal products, such as improved bronze working, a better potter's wheel, and the vertical loom, for instance, and the humped zebu cattle, and various vegetable and fruit crops. So you can, again, you can see a shift here in, at the time, modern technology via the Hyksos. New Kingdom of Egypt, right? From this increasingly prosperous, organized and dynamic base, Egypt projected military, diplomatic, and commercial power outward. Hatshepsut was Egypt's most powerful woman ruler, serving as a regent for her son Thutmose III, during which time she extended Egyptian power southward toward the precious metals and natural resources and labor sources in Nubia. As an expansionist power under Thutmose's rule, Egypt engaged in the first chariot battle in recorded history. His army commanded some 1,000 war chariots, and his success at the Battle of Megiddo extended Egyptian rule into Palestine. All right, the future, well, I guess, contemporary land of the Holy Land at the time. Territorial states in Southwest Asia. As in Egypt, climate change had profound effects on the inhabitants of Mesopotamia and Anatolia, right? Anatolia, modern day Turkey. So as the lower Euphrates River, the extreme droughts toward the end of the third millennium, coupled with hundreds of years of overcultivation of its soil, caused the center of political power to shift northward. So as in Egypt, this exacerbated the scarcity of natural resources and led to confrontations among insiders and outsiders. While pastoral nomads had invaded Egypt on chariots in Mesopotamia, transhumant herders in need of better grazing land for their herds made incursions into settled communities. So these herders had previously engaged in different ways with the city-states of Mesopotamia. Like during the winter, for instance, during the winter, they lived near these cities and their rivers to water their animals. They would engage in trade with these communities, mainly by selling animal products such as wool, leather, bones, and tendons to urban artisans. They also played civic roles, paying taxes, fighting in wars, and laboring on public works projects. As in Egypt, the impact of climate change and the incursion of an external force led to, again, political instability and the breakdown of the old order. Mesopotamian kingship. In this new political order, these Amorite herders became urban rulers and instituted a new social and political organization that fused their nomadic traditions with those of the former city-states. The Amorites' social organization was tribal, and that was led by a chief and a clan. It was kind of clan-based, claiming descent from some shared ancestor, probably some veneration worship there as well. And this system of ruled transition, again, was ruled by charismatic leaders, right? The charismatic hereditary kings who grew their power and passed it on to their children. And they were able to enhance authority by collaborating with the merchant class and other elites, which provided support for their rule. So in other words, as the merchant class was getting rich, they weren't inclined to look to usurp power or get in the grill of the bureaucrats. The most successful of these kings were able to expand their territory by conquering weaker neighbors. And these weaker polities were then incorporated as tributaries. And what they would do, they would pay these tributes of luxury goods, raw materials, and manpower to these Mesopotamian kings. And the key features that enabled rulers to expand was the effective control of military resources such as metal and horses. And again, the strategic use of one's charisma. Hammurabi, jumping ahead there, Hammurabi ruled Mesopotamia during the first half of the 18th century BC. And in this time, interesting character here, he sought both to expand state power against weaker neighbors and to centralize internal authority through the development of a new legal code. And this code served to bolster his power and enabled him to manage this expanding kingdom with its political capital in Babylon. Now, this self-image that he developed was modeled on the rule of Egyptian pharaohs in the Middle Kingdom. So the king would be a patriarch, a supreme father figure, if you will. But he also acted as a shepherd to a flock, responsible for their posterity and prosperity as well, and their well-being. So to enshrine this, he created a code called Hammurabi's Code, which depicted him as a just ruler, protecting divinely ordained laws. And these laws emphasized the king's control and responsibility to maintain justice and order. The code was also set to organize social and family relations. It specified the rights and privileges of different family members, fathers, wives, and children, and social classes, your freemen, your dependent men, and your slaves. And on page 127, or 126, you can see Hammurabi's Code. Can't read it, but you can see the inscription there on the shaft. And these laws included things like if someone's caught stealing, you cut their hands off, right? An eye for an eye, right? A tooth for a tooth. And again, looks like it may have borrowed from the Mosaic law in the New Testament or the Old Testament. Power and culture. Meanwhile, Mesopotamian rulers also promoted the arts and the intellectual life. Alongside the legal code, this also served to celebrate and justify their rule. The royal court consequently became a patron of skilled artisans and organized schools for scribes. These served to transmit oral tales from earlier Sumerians and Akkadians, which we looked at. And this continuity of ancient stories and traditions helped to legitimize the new rulers. Royal hymns, in particular, depicted the king as some kind of a legendary hero and asserted the importance of his role. So you could see forms of propaganda, I think it's safe to say, in these various cultures. Most notable, I don't know about propaganda, but most notable was the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Epic of Gilgamesh was about the famous king of early Uruk in Mesopotamia, and it was promoted and passed on by royal scribes. Its celebration of ancient founders served to emphasize the legitimacy of these new rulers as inheritors of that legendary tradition. And I almost gave that to you guys as a reading, an extra reading, but I didn't. Trade and the rise of a private economy. Not unlike Egypt, greater economic prosperity saw the rise of private entrepreneurs and wealth, as opposed to the dominance of economic activity by a centralized state. Private entrepreneurs were selected by these new rulers to collect taxes, which were paid in commodities such as grain or wool. And these could be exchanged for silver, which went to both these tax collectors and the state. So overall, it led to big increases in private and state wealth. And when stability was restored through this effective political and legal structure, Mesopotamia found itself at the crossroads of overland trade between the east and west. You can see this on your map, where kind of strategically located, even, they had nothing to do with that, just the way it was. So this was very beneficial to merchants and entrepreneurs able to exploit these trade routes. So as at sea as well, trade expanded in the second millennium and enhanced wealth for Mesopotamian merchants. So prior to all this, much of the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, the Persian Gulf, and the Arabian Sea were known by merchants. However, in the following centuries, innovations in ship design led to larger and sturdier ships that could carry larger loads over greater distances. So this required the importation of shipbuilding materials from all over the region and allowed merchants to reach the Indus Valley. So, which we're going to head to again here. We're going to take a look at that. We looked at it last chapter. So as a whole, it leads to economic specialization in different parts of the Eastern Mediterranean and the growth of regional economic integration. And I just love it. I love teaching about how man is expanding, expanding technology and just, on his own, coming up with ideas generally, right? The Main Street person who just does not have to be led around the nose by some elite someplace. But that's a discussion for my government class. Economically, the big payoff could be large. However, it was risky. Failed harvests could lead to big tax debts, which royal edicts could, however, come around and annul. To manage this long distance commercial activity, more formalized rules and relations were developed. So in that process, Mesopotamia becomes a critical link between Egypt, Anatolia to the north, and Southwest Asia. The old and new Hittite kingdoms. On the vast plains of Anatolia, right, modern day Turkey, various chariot warrior groups, there you go again, built fortified settlements and engaged in regional warfare in the first centuries of the second millennium BC. So chief among them were the Hittites, and who established the dominant territorial kingdom in Anatolia. Anatolia was a crucial overland crossroad between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, and it's flat. It was flat expanses that made travel over it easy. So the growth of Hittite power in the early second millennium saw the expansion and conquest of weaker neighbors. And as in Mesopotamia, these conquered peoples then became a source of tax revenue and tribute for the Hittites. Hattusilus the first was the Hittite ruler who defeated competing chariot warrior groups and unified these separate aristocracies under his rule. So in addition to his campaigns in Anatolia, he pushed southeastward in northern Syria, eventually sacking Babylon in 1595 BC. Centuries later, in 1274 BC, the Hittites engaged in the largest chariot battle recorded in history against the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses II at the Battle of Kadesh. And in a broad geopolitical sense, during this half millennium, the rise of Hittite power in Anatolia was essential to maintaining a balance of power among the territorial states in the regions. Again, you can check out map 3.2 and look at all of these players. The community of major powers, following the major reconfiguration of political power in the early second millennium BC, between 1400, 1200 BC, a much more stable system of international relations emerged between the big territorial powers in the Eastern Mediterranean and Southwest Asia, which is kind of cool. So from a cache of 350 letters found in the Egyptian city of Amarna, we have learned a lot about this diplomatic system. So the letters, they are written in civilization that we've looked at in the past here, Aegean, and the primary language of diplomacy was that at the time, and they reveal relations between the Egyptian pharaoh to his subordinates, as well as to kings throughout the region. So these letters show the mutual interest that the rulers had in maintaining peaceful relations and hence commercial activity. So rather than resort to warfare to resolve problems, they pursued diplomatic responses, right? Again, like I said, it's kind of cool. In addition to written communication, treaties, strategic marriages, and the exchange of gifts help to maintain this set of relationships. And these connections strengthen relationships and demonstrated mutual trust and respect. Let's move to the nomads over in the Indus River Valley. As elsewhere in Afro-Eurasia, drought struck the Indus River Valley as well around the turn of the second millennium. But unlike Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Anatolia, large competitive territorial states did not emerge here in the following centuries. However, in those regions, a nomadic population known as the Vedic people, who referred themselves as Aryans, or, quote, respected ones, migrated from their herds of horse and cattle from the inner Eurasian steppes through the Hindu Kush and into the Indus River Valley. So central Asia, central northern Asia, maybe out of what would be Russia today. So though they did not immediately establish a large territorial base, they had a large impact on the region. They introduced Sanskrit, which has the same source as all Indo-European languages. Like all other newly arrived groups, they mastered the horse-drawn chariots, which they introduced to the region and used to establish themselves. They used skillful metallurgy to enhance these chariots, which also gives them military superiority. So this conquest was accompanied by a deep religious conviction, an elaborate set of rituals which set them apart from the regular indigenous religious practice. However, as elsewhere during this period, there was a fusion of cultures from this period. So the Vedic folks spread their language, but they integrated the agrarian lifestyle that they encountered there. And you can look now, we're switching to another map, map 3.3. So from the Indus River Valley, the Vedic peoples migrated across the northern plain of South Asia, equipped with horse-drawn chariots and superior iron weapons. And each wave of occupation brought violence in their search for more territory and resources. Now, often they adopted the agrarian skills and knowledge of the seasons held by these conquered peoples. And as for habitation, they constructed homes made of mud, bamboo, and reeds. And they improved the production process of cornelian stone beads. And I think this is kind of cool too. This is ingenious to facilitate trade and standardize weights. They continue to raise domestic animals. They also cultivated wheat, rye, and learned to plant rice. And to improve agricultural yields, they mastered the use of plows and iron blades as well. So of all these practices, they fused traits from their origins in the steppes in the north with indigenous ways, and together they ended up facilitating the major shift among Vedic peoples from pastoralism to settled agriculture. So over time, they developed an import trade from Central and Southwest Asia. And you can see page 132. Take a look at that illustration. Shift to what would be modern day China, the Shang territorial state in East Asia. So along a similar timeline to South Asia, in the Indus River Valley, the Shang state consolidated power over its territory around 1600 BC, similar to Mesopotamian use of founding myths to justify the state. The Shang developed an origin story based on what they called the bamboo annals, okay, which tell of the first Shang ruler, Tang, who defeated the ruling Xia king, and he sacrificed himself to end the drought that threatened the kingdom. Tang then ruled justly over the state he founded in northeastern China. So the Shang territorial state drew on four central elements of the earlier Longshan, which we looked at last chapter, river-based cultures. And these included a metal industry based on copper, pottery making, walled towns, and divination using animal bones. Now, they also added their own innovations to manage a much larger population and territory. So as in other territorial states, they would establish these hereditary rulers, and with that, written records to manage affairs of state, again, large-scale metallurgy, a tributary system, and new religions and rituals to connect with ancestors and be able to tell the future. But what was the state formation like? Well, the Shang were able to establish a strong territorial state ruled by a wealthy and powerful elite. Copper and tin were available on the North China Plain, and a large, important bronze industry emerged there that enhanced Shang's superiority over its neighbors. This included weapons, again, chariot parts, right? This is the trend now, right? And vessels for rituals. And in metalworking, a large labor force mastered the use of a new and efficient casting technique to produce bronze objects. And so you needed artisans, right? The artisans and artistic qualities of this metalwork ended up becoming highly valued. And to reproduce these objects in artistic style, a huge amount of mining was required, undertaken by miners considered as tribute laborers. And in controlling access to the mines, the Shang kings prevented rivals from forging bronze weapons. So thus, this enhanced their own power and legitimacy. And the rivals' wooden and stone-tipped weapons were just no match for these. So the chariots did not appear until around 1200 BC here in this region. So well after their introduction in Egypt, in Southwest Asia and South Asia. So rather than as crucial military technology, they were kind of used for the upper class to hunt and just as symbols of status. They were much better than their neighbors and much larger than those used in Afro-Eurasia by contrast with those regions. The Shang would use huge infantry armies equipped with bronze weapons, and rather than chariot battalions. You can see page 134 in regard to that. And map 3.4. Something I wanted to turn your attention to. Map 3.4, right? Looking at yet another map for that section, Shang Dynasty. Okay. Now, agriculture and tribute. The Shang rulers understood that agriculture was essential to gaining and keeping power. They ran their own farms, which supplied the royal family. Meanwhile, food production increased thanks to the introduction of new agricultural technologies. For instance, farmers made more land available for farming by draining low-lying fields and cleaning forests. Farm tools such as stone plows, spades, and sickles could then be used to work this land. Farmers additionally raised silkworms, and they bred animals such as pigs, dogs, and sheep and oxen. To efficiently manage the growing season, the Shang instituted a 12-month lunar calendar. Looks like a good quiz question. Meanwhile, the quiz is coming up, right? We'll talk about that a little later. Meanwhile, the king, elite, and commoners were held together by the distribution of land. The king, in essence, would grant land to elites, and then the commoners would go work on it, right? They then sent tribute and surplus crops to these elite landholders, who in turn paid tribute to the ruling family. And this could take the form of turtle shells and cattle scapulas. Society and ritual practice. Given the strong economic foundation, the Shang could maintain a complex social structure, and it was fundamentally patrilineal, right? The father, geared toward the father. Each family traced its identity back to some male ancestor, although the family members held property in common. Male elders were the dominant members of a family, and that took precedence. Women married into their husband's family structure, and they were honored primarily for giving birth to their sons. And that's the way it is to this very hour. That's the way it is to this very hour. If you are, you ladies out there, hypothetically, if you were to marry a Chinese exchange student, it would probably be expected by the family members that he go back to China, and the Chinese culture would be that you would follow him. Okay. Death rituals reflected this social system. Burial sites reveal the royal elite buried with sacrificed wives, consorts, servants, and slaves. And this shows, as I say here, this shows the belief that the hierarchy on earth would, again, the belief that's going to continue in the afterlife. Very religious society. The Shang state depended also on the belief that its rulers received its authority from gods and his ancestors. As part of ancestral worship, the living made offerings to the departed, who often hoped they would help the living in different ways. So communicate with ancestors, the living performed rituals with divination, in which they heated bones and shells and interpreted the cracks that appeared. So scribes then inscribed the questions asked to ancestors on those bones or shells. So in this way, writing was related to dramatic religious rituals. So both political and religious authority was ultimately invested in the Shang ruler. Consequently, an independent priesthood did not emerge to mediate between the gods and humans. The diviners and the scribes involved in religious rituals were, subservient to the ruler, and their expertise served to legitimize the Shang rulers and ensured that rulers could pass on power to the next generation. Shang writing. Our main evidence for early Chinese writing comes from these oracle bones that I just mentioned, while other sources of writing on more perishable materials may have disappeared. Perishability and durability of sources also influence the content of the sources we have heard from Shang China, as compared with other major states from this period. So the oracle bones reveal questions about religion and the afterlife, whereas in Southwest Asia, the cuneiform in clay tablets that we looked at deals more with economic transitions in their writing and other official documents and historical records. So in further contrast, the transition in Shang China from record keeping to literature was slower than these other states. Writing, again, in Shang China served mainly to legitimize the king's position at the top of a royal hierarchy. Scribes and diviners, again, used those oracle bones to accumulate information about the future, which might help kings maintain their centralized power. Lastly, micro-societies in South Pacific and the Aegean. We see a new type of society, a micro-society. It's not really a shift. Geographically, there really wasn't much of a choice, which you'll understand here in a moment. Starting in anywhere second, fourth millennium, but accelerating from second to first millennium, migration from the south of China and Taiwan, set off by sea for Polynesia and East Asian coastal islands. And thinking map 3.5, you could probably turn there, keep one eye on that. I have that down a little farther, but I'm gonna get you turned to that as soon as possible here. So you can see China, Taiwan, right? Kind of your launching area. So in large, fast and sophisticated sea craft, these Austronesian peoples expanded into the Pacific Islands. Their double outrigger canoes were up to 100 feet long, with huge triangular sails, and they were used as a stabilizing device that enabled even greater voyages. So by about 400 BC, almost all of the South Pacific, including New Zealand and most of Australia, had been reached. This included the Philippines, Java and Sumatra. You can find these on your map there. Parts of Australia and New Guinea and Samoa and Fiji, right? Mainland Southeast Asia. And so over time, the Austronesians reached the Marquesas Islands in the Central Pacific. So all that territory right out there by that international date line, right? The South Pacific. As the migration over these vast oceanic distances began in South China, the languages subsequently spoken in Taiwan, the Philippines, and Indonesia share roots. Also shared among these Austronesian settlements were pottery, stone, tools, and domestic pigs and crops. These islands had tropical and subtropical climates and rich soil containing volcanic ash, which made the lands fertile. This helped Austronesians to raise a lot of dry crops, such as yams and sweet potatoes, irrigated crops, also, yams, and tree crops like breadfruit, bananas, and coconuts. And if you ever have me over for supper, never offer bananas, right? Not appealing to me. They can have those. In Indonesia, the coastline was a source of these rich maritime resources, right? Mobility by sailboat allowed settlers access to different food sources on other islands and to reach their primary food source of shellfish and fish, which I like. You can offer those. Polynesians in the South Pacific. Throughout the South Pacific, the Austronesians and their descendants shared linguistic, technological, cultural, and agricultural features. Agricultural productivity allowed their populations to grow, producing resources to support craft specialists and soldiers. Settlements almost always erected ceremonial buildings to enhance social unity. Unlike the major territorial settlements in Afro-Eurasia, political communities were organized as tribes or multi-island alliances. And generally, too, these fragmented and isolated micro-societies were divorced from life on mainland Asia, right? Obviously, by the ocean, via the ocean, the water, right? They have no choice, not big enough to become territorial states. And then you have your Aegean societies. And here you can take a look at map 3.6 on page 142. Like the South Pacific, political entities remained fragmented for much of this period. This was similarly due to the fragmented island geography, again, much like what we just looked at. So although these different polities had commercial and cultural connections, they did not form a unified political power. So in stark contrast to how major land settlements collapsed due to drought, there was no unitary regime to collapse in the Aegean islands and coasts. So instead, this region gradually developed during the second millennium through extensive trade with Africa, Europe, and Southwest Asia. They absorbed different influences from these land-based powers. So this region also experienced an important in-migration of people from the Danube region, you could find on your map there, and Central Europe, known as the Mycenaeans. And after their famous palace of Mycenae in mainland Greece, eventually they set to sea for greater resources and contact with neighbors. Influences on the Aegean world. Major influences entered the Aegean world from Southwest Asia, traveling along the main sea and commercial currents up the coast of the Levant, westward along Anatolia, and then into the islands of the Aegean Sea. And these islands, especially Cyprus and Crete, that you could see on the map there, were at the kind of the cross currents of Asia and Europe. And major influences from the East made their way to Europe through these intermediary islands. Cyprus was an important source of copper ore necessary to make bronze. It and other islands flourished from this extensive commercial activity. The Minoan culture, Crete, focusing, x-raying those islands there a little deeper now, a little more closely. Crete was a major trade hub and a site of major settlements and architecture. The builders of the many palaces that emerged are known as the Minoans, after their legendary king Minos. They accumulated substantial wealth by trading and colonizing throughout the region by the middle of the millennium. Around 1400, however, they attracted the interest of the Mycenaeans on the mainland, whose power was still centered, on the Greek mainland, and they replaced Minoan rulers on Crete. It's wondered too if Minoan culture, because it didn't have any, this is one of the arguments about this. Some people wonder if it wasn't matriarchal society, and because they didn't have any defensive walls. But I'm thinking, if you're out in the middle of the Mediterranean like that, probably not going to be constructing defensive walls. Probably see no need for it. The architecture they constructed bore the influence of Southwest Asian palaces, if in smaller form. Major religion and society and Minoan religion. Unlike the major mainland settlements, the Minoans did not have large temple complexes or a class of priests to manage their religion, and perhaps no professional scribes either. They focused on a female deity known as, quote, the lady. Again, another reason why folks may have felt a matriarchal society there. However, these microsocieties too harbored complex and diverse development. Much of it was not devoted to defense and warfare. For instance, Crete developed a centrally organized society, which, in contrast to mainland architecture, built light and airy palaces, not designed mainly for self-defense. On Thera, an island to the north of Crete, archaeologists have found large private houses equipped with bathrooms with running water and exotic wall paintings. And you can turn to page 145. Mycenaean culture, right? In contrast to the Minoans, that culture was more warlike. from Central Europe between 1850, 1600 BC. They brought the Aegean world horse-drawn chariots and metalworking skills, in addition to an Indo-European language. The chariot was crucial to their dominance of the indigenous population and conquest of land. It also was extremely important culturally in their mythology. Homer's epic poetry captures stories of chariot battles. War held a central place in Mycenaean material culture. It basically emphasized displays of weaponry, portraits of armed soldiers, and illustrations of violent conflict. In marked contrast with the Minoan palaces, the Tyrans and Mycenae in Greece were huge fortresses with these rough hewn stone walls that were built on cliffs, and they were designed for, as I would say, optimal defense. Politically, a ruler or a dominated a complex bureaucratic hierarchy with many subordinates. Palace scribes served to document government activity, including goods and services given to the inhabitants. Though their colonization and extension of trade, the Mycenaeans generated a lot of wealth, which we can detect in their very elaborate tombs. Mycenaean expansion, their culture spread around the fragmented microsocieties of the Aegean Sea, uniting to some extent those dispersed cultures, trade links, and a shared language. Greek was the shared language, and this shared language draws people together. So by the end of the millennium, this violent incursion of new migrants from Central Europe and internal conflicts breaks down the system of microsocieties, leading to the emergence of a new Greek-speaking social order in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea with an even more powerful future. So there you have that. You have your graphic organizer. You can pull that out and look that over. I prepared one of those for you. And we'll take a look here at what is up ahead and call it a day here. All right. All right. Yeah, I mean, a lot of basics here as you read page 109 and 147. For those of you who like to learn independently like that, there you have it, right? I've got a couple videos that supplement what I'm talking about, what you'll be reading. Again, short ones, but they're good. Nomads and herders, and the Austronesian migrations to the South Pacific. Got your review quiz Friday, initial discussion posts. Again, guys are getting better at this. I think most of the classes on board with getting the initial post on time. Some have not. And again, some of you have just great things to say. You really do. But can't really help anybody. Can't enhance the material. And some of you guys can do that with what you're writing. I'm really impressed. You're just getting it there too late, right? For other people to glean on it, right? Do that, right? You're losing points. And so Monday, we will begin chapter 4, First Empires and Common Cultures in Afro-Eurasia. And again, a programming note here, and this is important. I should probably put out an announcement on this. I keep saying that. October 13th, I have moved test 1 I had it on October 11th, and you know, that's your fall break, right? How dare I do that, right? And I didn't realize I was doing that when I was putting the syllabus together, right, during the summer. So I caught that. October 13th is the date for test one. And yeah, that's it. So, all right. Lengthy lecture this time, right? But hey, it's the way it goes. It's the material we have, and we'll make it. We'll work through it. So, any questions, comments? Yeah, feel free to contact me. If you guys want to talk about something, we could set that up. And because some things it's easier, I think, for you to talk about it, right, than to write about it, right? And I'm always a little weary about writing things anyway, because you know that things can be taken the wrong way. And I'm a lover, not a fighter. So, all right, I will talk to you guys next week, and you guys have a great week, and see you then.